Imagine discovering that death itself could be defied, not by science or medicine, but by something far more ancient and terrifying. Picture yourself in 1843 Alabama, where the impossible became reality and changed everything we thought we knew about life, death, and the secrets buried beneath southern soil. What you're about to witness is more than just a story. It's a documented mystery that historians have tried to explain for over 180 years. Prepare yourself for a journey into the darkest corners of American history, where the line between the living and the dead wasn't just blurred, it was completely shattered. Before we begin this haunting journey, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because what happened to Lisa Carter might still be happening today. Now, let's step back into 1843, where the impossible was about to unfold. The summer of 1843 arrived in Alabama like a fever dream, thick with humidity and secrets that clung to the magnolia trees surrounding Wycliffe Plantation. Established in 1798 by Colonel Jeremiah Wycliffe, the plantation sprawled across 2,847 acres of rich black soil, worked by 347 enslaved souls whose names were recorded only in ledgers, never in hearts. Among these forgotten people lived Lisa Carter, a woman whose very presence seemed to bend the natural order. Born somewhere along the Gold Coast of Africa around 1820, she had arrived at Wycliffe in 1839 aboard the illegal slave ship Nightingale, a vessel that, according to mobile harbor records, officially never existed. Lisa was different from the moment she set foot on Alabama soil. While other enslaved people kept their eyes downcast, Lisa's gaze seemed to pierce through dimensions. The plantation's overseer, Thomas Hartwell, noted in his journal, "The African woman sees things that ain't there. Makes the horses nervous, makes me nervous too." What made Lisa truly unsettling wasn't her defiance, it was her silence. She spoke only when absolutely necessary, and when she did, her words carried weight that seemed to echo from somewhere beyond the physical world. The other enslaved people whispered that Lisa could hear conversations between the dead, that she knew things before they happened, that she carried messages from ancestors whose bones lay scattered across ocean floors. Dr. Cornelius Blackwood, the plantation's physician, documented several incidents involving Lisa in his medical journal, which survived in the Alabama State Archives. In one entry dated June 15, 1843, he wrote, "The woman Lisa predicted the death of 3 field hands with uncanny accuracy. She claimed their time shadows were growing short. All 3 died within the week, 1 from fever, 2 from a wagon accident. Coincidence seems insufficient explanation." Indeed, the plantation house itself seemed to respond to Lisa's presence. Built in the Georgian style, with 14 rooms and walls that held 45 years of secrets, Wycliffe Manor had always been a place where whispers carried farther than they should. But since Lisa's arrival, servants reported doors opening by themselves, cold spots in rooms where fires burned bright, and the sound of African drums echoing from empty chambers. Mrs. Eleanor Wycliffe, the colonel's wife, wrote to her sister in Charleston, "There is something about the African woman that disturbs the very air. Yesterday, I found her standing in the parlor, staring at Father's portrait. When I asked what she was doing, she simply said, 'He's not resting. Father has been dead for 7 years.'" The enslaved community at Wycliffe had developed its own understanding of Lisa's abilities. Old Moses, the plantation's eldest resident, who had been there since 1801, told others that Lisa carried the sight, a gift that allowed her to see the threads connecting the world of the living to the realm of the dead. According to oral histories preserved by the Freedmen's Bureau after the Civil War, Lisa had correctly predicted weather patterns, warned of impending illnesses, and once saved 12 people from a barn fire by insisting they leave minutes before lightning struck. But Lisa's most disturbing ability was her connection to what she called The crossing places, locations where the boundary between life and death grew thin. She claimed that Wycliffe Plantation sat on one of these crossing places, built deliberately over an ancient burial ground that predated European settlement by centuries. Archaeological evidence discovered in 1923 during renovation work supports this claim. Workers found artifacts suggesting the land had been used as a sacred burial site by Creek and Cherokee peoples for over 500 years before the plantation's construction. Among the artifacts were ceremonial items associated with death rituals and spiritual communication, items that, according to tribal historians, were used to help souls transition between worlds. The summer heat of 1843 seemed to amplify whatever forces surrounded Lisa. Temperatures reached record highs. The mobile register reported 107 degrees Fahrenheit on July 4th, and the oppressive atmosphere created conditions that felt almost supernatural. Animals behaved strangely. Horses refused to enter certain areas of the plantation, dogs howled at empty spaces, and birds avoided flying over the main house. Thomas Hartwell's journal entries from this period reveal growing unease. The African woman's influence spreads like sickness. Yesterday, 3 field hands claimed they saw figures walking between the cotton rows, figures that cast no shadows. When I investigated, found only Lisa, standing motionless, lips moving as if in conversation with invisible companions. Dr. Blackwood's medical observations became increasingly detailed as he tried to understand Lisa's condition. He noted that her pulse rate remained consistently lower than normal. Her body temperature fluctuated without apparent cause, and her eyes occasionally displayed a phenomenon he described as depth without bottom, pupils that seemed to reflect light from sources that weren't there. The plantation's records, maintained by Clerk Samuel Morrison, show that productivity actually increased during Lisa's time at Wycliffe, despite the growing atmosphere of unease. Workers seemed to anticipate problems before they occurred, avoided accidents with unusual frequency, and demonstrated knowledge of weather patterns that allowed for optimal planting and harvesting. Morrison wrote, "It's as if the woman brings information from sources beyond normal human perception." But the most chilling aspect of Lisa's presence was her relationship with death itself. She attended every death on the plantation, appearing at bedsides without being summoned, offering comfort in languages that no one recognized, but everyone somehow understood. Witnesses reported that people died more peacefully in Lisa's presence, as if she served as a guide for souls making their final journey. The Creek tribal elder Joseph Ridge, interviewed by ethnographer James Mooney in 1891, provided context for Lisa's abilities. Some people are born standing in 2 worlds. They see what others cannot see, hear what others cannot hear. The white men built their plantation on sacred ground, and the woman Lisa, she was chosen to be the bridge. As July 1843 progressed, the atmosphere at Wycliffe Plantation grew increasingly charged with supernatural tension. Lisa's presence seemed to awaken something that had been sleeping beneath the Alabama soil for centuries. The enslaved community whispered of ancestors stirring in their graves, of ancient spirits growing restless, of a reckoning that had been delayed but never forgotten. What none of them knew was that Lisa Carter was about to become the center of an event that would challenge everything they believed about life, death, and the mysterious forces that govern the passage between worlds. The morning of July 23, 1843, dawned with an oppressive stillness that seemed to press against the earth itself. According to meteorological records kept by the mobile weather station, atmospheric pressure dropped to 29.12 inches of mercury, the lowest reading recorded that summer. The air hung motionless, thick as molasses, while an unnatural quiet settled over Wycliffe Plantation like a burial shroud. Lisa Carter had been assigned to work in the main house that day, polishing silver and maintaining the elaborate dining room where the Wycliffe family entertained Mobile's elite. The room contained 47 pieces of imported English silver, each piece requiring meticulous care under the watchful eye of Mrs. Eleanor Wycliffe, whose standards for perfection bordered on obsession. At precisely 10:30 a.m., according to the house clock that still chimes in the restored Wycliffe Manor Museum, Lisa made a discovery that would seal her fate. While cleaning behind the massive mahogany sideboard, her fingers found a hidden compartment containing documents that the Wycliffe family had kept secret for decades. The papers, written in Colonel Jeremiah Wycliffe's distinctive handwriting, detailed financial arrangements with slave traders that extended far beyond legal boundaries. More disturbing were records of medical experiments conducted on enslaved people, documented collaborations with physicians from Mobile Medical College, and detailed accounts of deaths that had been deliberately caused for research purposes. Among the most damning documents was a letter dated 1835, addressed to Dr. Samuel Cartwright in New Orleans, describing experiments designed to test the physical and spiritual resilience of the African Constitution. The letter contained phrases that would haunt anyone who read them. Subject expired after 47 minutes of induced trauma. Remarkable vocal responses suggest consciousness persisted beyond expected parameters. Lisa's reaction to these documents was witnessed by Sarah Jenkins, a house servant whose testimony was later recorded by Union forces during the Civil War. According to Sarah's account, Lisa's entire demeanor changed as she read. Her eyes went wide, then narrow, like she was seeing something terrible but not surprising. She whispered something in that African language of hers, and I swear the temperature in that room dropped 10 degrees. Mrs. Eleanor Wycliffe entered the dining room at 10:45 a.m. and immediately noticed Lisa's distress. When questioned about her condition, Lisa made a decision that would prove fatal. She told the truth. In clear, precise English, she described what she had found and demanded to know why the Wycliffe family had participated in such horrors. The confrontation that followed was witnessed by 3 house servants and documented in Thomas Hartwell's journal. Mrs. Wycliffe's response was swift and vicious. She accused Lisa of theft, of reading private documents without permission, and of attempting to incite rebellion among the enslaved population. But Lisa's response revealed the true depth of her supernatural awareness. "I know about the others," Lisa said, her voice carrying an otherworldly resonance that made the crystal glasses on the sideboard vibrate. "I know about the ones who died screaming in the cellar. I know about the children who were taken. I know about the spirits that walk these halls, seeking justice that never came." Dr. Blackwood's journal entry for that day provides clinical detail about what happened next. Mrs. Wycliffe summoned Hartwell immediately. The woman Lisa was accused of multiple infractions: theft, insubordination, and what Mrs. Wycliffe termed supernatural intimidation. The punishment was to be severe: 50 lashes, followed by confinement in the punishment cellar. The punishment cellar at Wycliffe Plantation was a stone chamber built into the foundation of the main house, measuring 8 feet by 6 feet with a ceiling height of only 5.5 feet. The chamber had been constructed in 1799 specifically for disciplining enslaved people, with iron rings embedded in the walls and drainage channels carved into the floor. Archaeological surveys conducted in 1967 revealed that the cellar had been built directly over a creek burial site, with human remains still visible beneath the stone flooring. At 2:00 p.m., Lisa was taken to the whipping post behind the main house. The post, carved from a single piece of Alabama oak, stood 12 feet high and bore the scars of countless previous punishments. Thomas Hartwell administered the 50 lashes himself, using a cat-o'-nine tails that had been specially crafted with metal tips designed to maximize pain and scarring. Witnesses to the punishment reported several disturbing phenomena. According to Samuel Morrison's records, Lisa never cried out during the whipping. instead maintaining a steady, rhythmic chanting in what linguists later identified as a West African dialect related to Yoruba spiritual practices. More unsettling was the behavior of the local wildlife. Birds fell silent, insects disappeared, and the plantation's dogs began howling in unison from locations scattered across the property. Dr. Blackwood examined Lisa after the whipping and noted severe trauma, deep lacerations across the entire back surface, significant blood loss, and signs of shock. However, the subject's vital signs remain remarkably stable. Pulse rate 58 beats per minute, respiration steady at 14 breaths per minute. Most patients in similar condition would be unconscious or near death. Following the whipping, Lisa was dragged to the punishment cellar and chained to the wall. The cellar's temperature remained constant at 58 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, but witnesses reported that the air grew noticeably colder as Lisa was confined. Sarah Jenkins, who brought water to the cellar, later testified, "The cold hit you like a wall when you got near that door, and there were sounds, not from Lisa, but from somewhere else, like voices whispering in languages I'd never heard." Throughout the afternoon and evening of July 23rd, strange phenomena occurred throughout the plantation. The main house's grandfather clock stopped at 6:17 p.m. and refused to restart despite multiple attempts by the clockmaker. Candles flickered and died without apparent cause. Mirrors throughout the house reflected images that didn't match what stood before them. Shadows where there should be light, figures where rooms stood empty. Most disturbing were the reports from the enslaved quarters. Old Moses told others that he could hear drumming coming from the direction of the main house, rhythmic patterns that matched traditional funeral ceremonies from his homeland. Other residents reported seeing figures walking between the buildings, tall, dark shapes that moved with purpose but cast no shadows in the moonlight. At midnight, according to multiple witnesses, the sounds from the punishment cellar changed. Lisa's chanting, which had continued steadily for 10 hours, suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was described by Thomas Hartwell as deeper than death itself. When he investigated, bringing a lantern to peer through the cellar's barred window, he found Lisa hanging motionless from her chains, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, her eyes open but reflecting no light. Dr. Blackwood was summoned immediately. His examination, conducted at 12:47 a.m. on July 24th, confirmed what everyone feared. Lisa Carter was dead. Her body showed no pulse, no respiration, no response to painful stimuli. Her skin had taken on the waxy pallor characteristic of death, and rigor mortis was already beginning to set in. But even in death, Lisa's presence continued to affect the plantation. The temperature in the cellar dropped to near freezing, despite the summer heat above ground. Strange lights were seen flickering in the windows of the main house. And from somewhere deep beneath the plantation's foundations came the sound of voices, dozens of voices, singing in harmonies that seemed to rise from the earth itself. What no one realized was that Lisa Carter's death was not an ending, but a beginning. The crossing place she had spoken of was about to reveal its true power, and the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead was about to be shattered forever. Dawn broke on July 25th, 1843, with an eerie crimson light that painted the Alabama sky the color of dried blood. According to astronomical records from the Mobile Observatory, a rare atmospheric phenomenon occurred that morning. A combination of high-altitude dust and unusual humidity that created what meteorologists now call a blood dawn. The enslaved community at Wycliffe Plantation interpreted this ominous sign differently. The ancestors were stirring. Lisa Carter's body had been lying in the punishment cellar for 36 hours. Dr. Cornelius Blackwood had pronounced her dead at 12:47 a.m. on July 24th, and rigor mortis had set in completely by dawn. According to his medical notes, preserved in the Alabama Medical Historical Society archives, Lisa's body exhibited all the classic signs of death. No pulse, no respiration, fixed and dilated pupils, and the characteristic waxy pallor of deceased tissue. Thomas Hartwell's journal entry for July 25th reveals the growing unease among the plantation's white residents. Second night of strange occurrences. The main house feels wrong. Cold spots in rooms where fires burn bright, shadows that move independently of their sources, and sounds that have no earthly explanation. Mrs. Wycliffe refuses to enter the dining room where the woman Lisa made her accusations, says the air itself feels contaminated with malice. The enslaved community had spent the night in prayer and preparation. Old Moses, drawing on traditions that stretched back to his childhood in West Africa, had organized what he called a crossing ceremony, rituals designed to help Lisa's spirit find peace in the afterlife. According to oral histories collected by the Works Progress Administration in the 1930s, the ceremony involved drumming, chanting, and the creation of spiritual offerings placed at the base of the ancient oak tree that served as the community's unofficial cemetery. At 6 a.m., Samuel Morrison unlocked the punishment cellar to begin preparations for Lisa's burial. Plantation records show that enslaved people who died were typically buried within 24 hours in unmarked graves beneath the oak tree. But when Morrison opened the heavy wooden door, he discovered something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The cellar was empty. The iron shackles that had held Lisa's body hung open, their locks still secure, but somehow no longer containing their prisoner. The stone floor showed no signs of disturbance, no indication of how a dead body could have escaped from a locked chamber. Most unsettling of all, the cellar's temperature had returned to normal, and the oppressive atmosphere that had surrounded the space for 2 days had completely vanished. Morrison's immediate reaction, documented in his own handwriting, was panic. Ran to inform Mr. Hartwell immediately, found him in the stable, tending to horses that had been restless all night. When I told him about the empty cellar, his face went white as cotton. We searched the entire plantation grounds, but found no trace of the woman's body. The search for Lisa's remains involved every white resident of the plantation and lasted until noon. They examined every building, every field, every possible hiding place where a body might have been concealed. Dr. Blackwood participated in the search, bringing his medical expertise to bear on the mystery. His journal entry reveals his growing bewilderment. A corpse cannot simply vanish. Rigor mortis had been complete. Decomposition had begun. Yet there is no physical evidence that a body was ever in that cellar. At 12:30 p.m., while the search continued, Sarah Jenkins was hanging laundry behind the main house when she saw something that made her drop the wet sheets and run screaming toward the plantation house. Walking slowly across the cotton field, moving with deliberate purpose toward the main house, was Lisa Carter. She was alive. Sarah's testimony, recorded by Union forces in 1865, provides the first eyewitness account of Lisa's return. She walked like she had all the time in the world, but there was something different about her. Her clothes were the same ones she'd died in, but they weren't torn or dirty like you'd expect. And her back, where she'd been whipped so terrible, there wasn't a mark on her, not a single scar. The news of Lisa's appearance spread through the plantation like wildfire. Thomas Hartwell was the first white person to confront her, meeting her in the yard between the main house and the enslaved quarters. His journal entry describes an encounter that defied all rational explanation. The woman stood before me, breathing, speaking, undeniably alive, but her eyes held depths that seemed to contain centuries. When I demanded to know how she had escaped, she simply said, "I was called back. There is work to be done. Doctor." Blackwood's medical examination of Lisa, conducted that afternoon, revealed impossible physiological changes. His detailed notes describe a woman who was undeniably the same person he had pronounced dead 36 hours earlier, but whose body showed no signs of the trauma that had killed her. The whip marks were gone, the signs of shock and blood loss had vanished, and her vital signs were not just normal, they were perfect. Pulse rate exactly 60 beats per minute, respiration 16 breaths per minute, body temperature 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, Blackwood wrote. These readings are more consistent with a healthy 20-year-old than with someone who recently suffered severe trauma and death. Most disturbing is her response to questions about her experience. She claims to remember crossing over and speaks of conversations with deceased individuals whose names she could not possibly know. The enslaved community's reaction to Lisa's return was complex and deeply spiritual. Old Moses interpreted her resurrection as a sign that the ancestors had chosen her as their representative in the world of the living. According to WPA interviews with former slaves, many believed that Lisa had been sent back to deliver justice for the crimes committed at Wycliffe Plantation. But Lisa herself seemed changed by her experience beyond death. Witnesses reported that she now spoke with authority about events that had occurred on the plantation before her arrival, describing in detail the deaths of enslaved people who had died years earlier. She knew the names of children who had been sold away, could recite the final words of people who had died alone, and spoke of hidden graves scattered across the plantation grounds. Mrs. Eleanor Wycliffe's reaction to Lisa's return bordered on hysteria. Her letters to relatives in Charleston, preserved in the South Carolina Historical Society, reveal a woman consumed by terror. The African woman has returned from the dead, and she knows things, terrible things about our family, about what has happened in this house. She looks at me with eyes that seem to see straight through to my soul, and I fear what judgment she might pronounce. The physical phenomena that had plagued the plantation during Lisa's death intensified after her return. Servants reported that mirrors throughout the main house now reflected images of people who weren't there, figures in chains, children crying, men and women bearing the marks of violence. The grandfather clock that had stopped during Lisa's punishment now chimed at random intervals, marking time that seemed to exist outside normal temporal boundaries. Most unsettling were the changes in the plantation's animal population. Horses refused to enter certain areas of the property, dogs howled continuously during daylight hours, and birds avoided flying over the main house entirely. Dr. Blackwood noted in his journal, "The woman's return has created an atmosphere of supernatural dread that affects every living creature on the property. It is as if the natural order has been fundamentally disrupted." Indeed, as evening approached on July 25th, Lisa took up residence in the enslaved quarters, but her presence there brought no comfort to the community. Instead, people reported that she spent hours in conversation with invisible companions, speaking in languages that predated European contact with Africa. Children claimed they could see figures standing beside her, tall, dignified people in clothing that seemed to shimmer between traditional African dress and burial shrouds. The truth was becoming clear to everyone at Wycliffe Plantation. Lisa Carter had not simply returned from the dead. She had brought something back with her, or perhaps something had sent her back, and whatever force had restored her to life had its own agenda, one that would soon transform the plantation into a battleground between the living and the dead. The third night after Lisa Carter's impossible return brought with it phenomena that would be documented by multiple witnesses and preserved in historical records for generations. July 26, 1843, marked the beginning of what plantation residents would later describe as the time when the dead walked among the living, and the supernatural events that unfolded challenged every assumption about the nature of life, death, and justice. At sunset, Lisa emerged from the enslaved quarters and walked deliberately toward the main house. According to Thomas Hartwell's journal, her approach was accompanied by an unnatural silence that seemed to muffle all sound across the plantation. The evening birds stopped singing, the insects fell quiet, even the wind died away. The only sound was her footsteps on the gravel path, each step echoing like a drumbeat announcing Judgment Day. Mrs. Eleanor Wycliffe watched Lisa's approach from the second-floor window of her bedroom, and her subsequent letter to her sister in Charleston provides a chilling first-hand account. She walked with the bearing of a queen, but around her, I swear this on our mother's grave, walked others, shadows that moved independently, figures that seemed to shimmer between visibility and transparency. I counted at least a dozen, all moving in perfect synchronization with her steps. Dr. Blackwood, who had been staying at the plantation to observe Lisa's condition, positioned himself in the front parlor to witness whatever was about to unfold. His medical journal entry for that evening reads, "The woman Lisa approached the main house at approximately 7:15 p.m. The temperature in the parlor dropped from 78 degrees to 52 degrees in the span of 2 minutes. Most remarkably, the barometric pressure gauge I had brought from mobile registered readings that should be physically impossible at sea level. Lisa stopped at the front steps of the main house and spoke in a voice that carried across the entire plantation. Witnesses from the enslaved quarters, located nearly 200 yards away, reported hearing every word with perfect clarity. Her message was simple but terrifying. The time for accounting has come. Those who have taken life must answer to those whose lives were taken. What happened next was witnessed by 17 people and documented in multiple sources. The front door of Wycliffe Manor opened by itself, despite being locked and barred from the inside. Lisa walked through the doorway, and as she crossed the threshold, the house itself seemed to respond to her presence. Candles lit spontaneously in every room, casting dancing shadows that moved independently of their flames. Samuel Morrison, who had been hiding in the library, described the scene in his personal diary. The woman Lisa moved through the house like she owned it, but she wasn't alone. I could see them now, the others who walked with her, men, women, children, all bearing the marks of violence, all moving with purpose towards some terrible reckoning. Lisa's first destination was the dining room, where she had discovered the hidden documents 3 days earlier. She stood before the mahogany sideboard and spoke to the empty air, but witnesses reported hearing responses in voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Dr. Blackwood, observing from the doorway, noted, "The woman appeared to be conducting a conversation with invisible participants. Most disturbing was that I could occasionally hear fragments of responses, voices speaking in English, but with accents and inflections I had never encountered." The conversation lasted for nearly an hour, during which the temperature in the dining room continued to drop until frost began forming on the windows despite the July heat outside. Lisa's words, recorded by multiple witnesses, revealed the true scope of the horrors that had occurred at Wycliffe Plantation over the decades. 47 souls, she said, her voice carrying supernatural authority. 47 people who died not from disease or accident, but from deliberate cruelty. Children sold away from their mothers. Women violated and murdered to hide the evidence. Men worked to death for the entertainment of visitors. All of it documented, all of it hidden, all of it crying out for justice. As Lisa spoke, the hidden compartment in the sideboard opened by itself, revealing not just the documents she had found earlier, but additional papers that had been concealed for years. These new documents, later examined by federal investigators during Reconstruction, contained detailed records of medical experiments, financial arrangements with illegal slave traders, and correspondence with other plantation owners describing methods for maximizing profit through systematic brutality. Mrs. Eleanor Wycliffe, who had been listening from the second floor, suddenly appeared in the dining room doorway. Her confrontation with Lisa was witnessed by Sarah Jenkins and recorded in testimony given to Union forces in 1865. Mrs. Wycliffe was shaking like a leaf, But she tried to maintain her authority. She demanded that Lisa leave the house immediately. That's when Lisa turned to look at her, and I saw Mrs. Wycliffe's face go white as a sheet. Lisa's response to Mrs. Wycliffe revealed knowledge that no living person should have possessed. "I know about your father's death, Eleanor. I know it wasn't fever that took him. I know about the poison you put in his medicine, and I know why. The others told me, the ones who watched from the other side as you murdered him for his inheritance." The accusation sent shockwaves through everyone present. Mrs. Wycliffe's father, Colonel Jeremiah Wycliffe, had died in 1836 of what was officially recorded as yellow fever. But Lisa's supernatural knowledge suggested a far darker truth, one that would explain Mrs. Wycliffe's desperate attempts to hide the plantation's records. Dr. Blackwood's journal entry describes what happened next. Mrs. Wycliffe collapsed, as if struck by lightning. When I examined her, she was conscious but appeared to be in a state of shock. Most remarkably, she began speaking rapidly about events from 1836, confessing to actions that, if true, would constitute murder. It was as if the woman Lisa's presence had broken down some psychological barrier that had contained her guilt for 7 years. As Mrs. Wycliffe's confessions poured forth, the supernatural phenomena in the house intensified. Mirrors throughout the manor began reflecting scenes from the past, images of violence, suffering, and death that had occurred within those walls. Witnesses reported seeing the reflections of people who had died years earlier, all of them watching the unfolding confrontation with expressions of grim satisfaction. The most disturbing manifestation occurred in the main staircase, where the portraits of the Wycliffe family ancestors began to change. The painted faces shifted and moved, their expressions transforming from dignified poses to looks of horror and accusation. Thomas Hartwell, who witnessed this phenomenon, wrote, "The very walls of the house seemed to be revealing their secrets, showing us the truth that had been hidden beneath layers of respectability and false piety." Lisa moved through the house with increasing authority, visiting each room where violence had occurred. In the kitchen, she revealed the location of a hidden grave beneath the floorboards. In the cellar, she showed witnesses scratches on the walls made by people who had died in captivity. In the master bedroom, she described in detail the murder of Colonel Wycliffe, providing information that only the killer could have known. As midnight approached, Lisa gathered all the plantation's residents, white and enslaved alike, in the main parlor. Her words, recorded by multiple witnesses, would be remembered for generations. The dead do not rest when justice is denied. They wait, they watch, and when the time is right, they return to claim what was stolen from them. Tonight, the accounting begins. What none of the living residents of Wycliffe Plantation realized was that Lisa's supernatural reckoning was only the beginning. The forces she had awakened would not be satisfied with mere confession and revelation. They demanded something far more profound, a complete transformation of the natural order that had allowed such horrors to occur. Midnight on July 26, 1843, brought with it an event that would be documented in official records, personal journals, and oral histories for over a century. As the grandfather clock in Wycliffe Manor chimed 12 times, each note seeming to hang in the air longer than physically possible, Lisa Carter raised her hands and spoke words in an ancient African dialect that none of the living witnesses understood, but all of them felt in their bones. "Let those who were silenced speak," she said, switching to English. "Let those who were forgotten be remembered. Let those who were denied justice receive their due." What happened next challenged every law of nature and reason. According to Dr. Cornelius Blackwood's detailed medical journal, the temperature in the main parlor dropped to 34 degrees Fahrenheit in less than 60 seconds. Frost formed on the windows, breath became visible in the air, and yet no one felt cold. Instead, witnesses reported a sensation of profound anticipation, as if the very atmosphere was holding its breath. Thomas Hartwell's journal provides the most comprehensive account of what followed. The air in the parlor began to shimmer like heat waves rising from summer pavement, but cold instead of hot. Through these shimmering curtains, figures began to appear, translucent at first, then growing more solid with each passing moment. I counted 23 distinct individuals, all bearing the unmistakable marks of violent death. The first spirit to fully manifest was a young woman carrying an infant. According to Lisa's supernatural translation, this was Mercy Williams, who had died in 1834 after being beaten for refusing to abandon her newborn child. The baby had been sold to a plantation in Mississippi, and Mercy had died from her injuries 3 days later. Her testimony, delivered through Lisa's voice but carrying Mercy's own memories and emotions, revealed details about the sale that had never been recorded in any official document. She says the baby was sold for $47 to a man named Hutchinson, Lisa translated, her voice carrying an otherworldly resonance. She says Mrs. Wycliffe counted the money twice and used it to buy new china for the dining room. She says the baby's name was Samuel, and he would be 9 years old now if he still lives. Samuel Morrison, who had been maintaining the plantation's financial records for over a decade, confirmed the accuracy of these details. His ledger for 1834 showed a sale of one infant Negro for exactly $47, and household records indicated the purchase of a china set from Charleston during the same period. The precision of these supernatural revelations was impossible to dismiss as coincidence. The second spirit to testify was an elderly man named Jupiter, who had served as the plantation's blacksmith until his death in 1839. According to his ghostly testimony, Jupiter had been murdered after discovering that Thomas Hartwell was selling plantation tools and keeping the profits for himself. The murder had been disguised as an accident involving the forge, but Jupiter's spirit provided details about the actual cause of death that only his killer could have known. Dr. Blackwood's medical training allowed him to evaluate the accuracy of Jupiter's testimony. The spirit described injuries consistent with deliberate strangulation, not the burns and smoke inhalation that were officially recorded as cause of death. Most remarkably, he provided anatomical details about the positioning of bruises on his throat that would only be visible during a thorough post-mortem examination, an examination that was never performed. As each spirit testified, the supernatural phenomena in the house intensified. Mirrors reflected not the current scene, but moments from the past when each murder had occurred. The walls themselves seemed to become transparent, revealing hidden graves, concealed evidence, and secret chambers where unspeakable acts had taken place. Mrs. Eleanor Wycliffe, who had been in a state of shock since her earlier confrontation with Lisa, suddenly began speaking in a voice that wasn't her own. According to witnesses, she was channeling the spirit of her father, Colonel Jeremiah Wycliffe, who was providing his own testimony about his daughter's crimes. "She poisoned my evening brandy with arsenic purchased from the apothecary in Mobile," Mrs. Wycliffe said, in a voice deeper and more authoritative than her own. "She forged my will to ensure her inheritance and buried the original document beneath the rose garden. She has been living on blood money for 7 years, and the weight of her crimes has driven her to madness." Sarah Jenkins, who had served in the main house for 15 years, confirmed details of this supernatural confession. Her testimony to Union investigators in 1865 revealed that she had indeed noticed Mrs. Wycliffe making frequent trips to the rose garden in the weeks following her father's death, always carrying a small shovel and always returning with dirt under her fingernails. The most disturbing testimony came from the spirits of children who had died at Wycliffe Plantation. Lisa served as translator for a group of 7 young spirits, ranging in age from infancy to 12 years old. Their stories revealed a systematic pattern of abuse, neglect and murder that had been hidden from outside observers for decades. One child, identified as Little Moses, no relation to Old Moses from the enslaved quarters, described being used in medical experiments conducted by visiting physicians from Mobile Medical College. According to his testimony, children were deliberately infected with diseases to test potential treatments, with no regard for their survival. The experiments were conducted in a hidden chamber beneath the main house, accessible through a concealed door in the cellar. Dr. Blackwood's investigation of this claim led to the discovery of the hidden chamber, exactly as described by the child's spirit. The room contained medical equipment, restraints designed for small bodies, and detailed notes describing experiments that violated every principle of medical ethics. The discovery of this evidence provided physical confirmation of the supernatural testimonies. As the night progressed, the spirits revealed the locations of unmarked graves scattered across the plantation grounds. They described a network of secret burials designed to hide the true number of deaths that had occurred at Wycliffe. According to their collective testimony, the official plantation records showed only a fraction of the actual mortality rate among the enslaved population. The supernatural court session continued until dawn, with each spirit providing testimony that was corroborated by physical evidence or documentary proof. The precision and accuracy of their revelations made it impossible for even the most skeptical witnesses to dismiss what they were experiencing as hallucination or fraud. Old Moses, who had been observing the proceedings from the enslaved quarters, later told WPA interviewers that the night represented the greatest gathering of ancestors he had ever witnessed. According to his account, the spirits had been waiting for someone like Lisa, someone who could serve as a bridge between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, to finally tell their stories and demand justice. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the frost-covered windows of Wycliffe Manor, Lisa spoke one final time in her role as supernatural translator. The testimony is complete. The evidence has been presented. The time for judgment has arrived, but judgment belongs not to the living, but to forces beyond human understanding. The spirits began to fade as the sun rose, but their presence left an indelible mark on everyone who had witnessed their testimony. The truth about Wycliffe Plantation had been revealed in all its horrific detail, and there would be no returning to the comfortable lies that had hidden these crimes for so long. What remained to be seen was what form the supernatural justice would take, and whether the living residents of the plantation would survive the reckoning that was about to unfold. Dawn on July 27, 1843, revealed a transformed Wycliffe Plantation. The supernatural testimonies of the previous night had left physical evidence that could not be denied or explained away. According to Dr. Cornelius Blackwood's morning examination, frost patterns on the windows had formed into recognizable shapes, faces, names, and dates that corresponded exactly to the spirits who had testified. Most remarkably, these frost patterns persisted despite the rising temperature, defying all natural laws. Thomas Hartwell's journal entry for that morning reveals a man whose worldview had been shattered, slept not a moment. How could I, knowing what I now know? The woman Lisa sits in the main parlor like a judge awaiting the execution of her sentence. The house itself feels different, lighter in some ways, as if secrets that had weighed it down for decades have finally been released. But there is also a sense of impending doom, as if the revelations were only the beginning of something far more terrible. The enslaved community had spent the night in prayer and preparation, understanding that the supernatural forces unleashed by Lisa's return were approaching their climax. Old Moses gathered the community at dawn and shared his interpretation of the night's events. The ancestors have spoken their truth. Now comes the time of balance. What was taken must be returned. What was hidden must be revealed. What was wrong must be made right. Mrs. Eleanor Wycliffe had not spoken since channeling her father's spirit the previous night. Dr. Blackwood's examination found her in a catatonic state, conscious but unresponsive, her eyes fixed on something that only she could see. Her condition would persist for the remainder of her life, leading to her eventual commitment to the Alabama State Hospital for the Insane in 1847. At 8 a.m., Lisa emerged from the main house carrying a leather-bound ledger that no one had seen before. According to witnesses, the book appeared to be very old, its pages yellowed with age, but the writing inside was fresh and clear. Samuel Morrison, who examined the ledger, later testified that it contained a complete record of every crime committed at Wycliffe Plantation since its founding in 1798. Information that could only have been compiled by supernatural means. The ledger's contents were devastating. It documented not just the murders and abuse that had been revealed the previous night, but also financial crimes, illegal slave trading, and connections to a network of plantations throughout Alabama and Mississippi that had been engaging in similar activities. The book contained names, dates, amounts of money, and details about crimes that had been committed decades before Lisa's arrival at the plantation. Lisa's announcement to the assembled plantation residents was delivered with the authority of divine judgment. The record is complete. The crimes have been documented. The price must be paid, but the payment will not be extracted by human hands. It will be collected by forces that have been waiting patiently for justice to be served. What followed was a series of supernatural events that would be documented by multiple witnesses and preserved in historical records. At 9:30 a.m., the hidden chamber beneath the main house, where medical experiments had been conducted on enslaved children, began to fill with water, despite being located on high ground with no apparent source. The water was ice cold and carried with it the sound of children's voices singing lullabies in African languages. Thomas Hartwell's attempt to drain the chamber proved futile. According to his journal, pumped water from the chamber for 3 hours, but the level never dropped. The water appears to be coming from the earth itself, as if the ground is weeping for the innocents who died in that cursed room. Most disturbing is that the water is crystal clear, but when you look into it, you see faces, the faces of the children who suffered there. At noon, the rose garden where Mrs. Wycliffe had buried her father's original will began to transform. Witnesses reported that the roses, which had been blooming magnificently for 7 years, suddenly withered and died. In their place, new plants began to grow, plants that no one could identify, with flowers that bloomed in colors that seemed to shift and change depending on the angle of observation. Dr. Blackwood's botanical examination of these supernatural plants revealed characteristics that defied classification. The specimens appear to be a hybrid of African and North American flora, but the combination should be genetically impossible. Most remarkably, the flowers emit a fragrance that different observers describe differently. Some smell jasmine, others detect the scent of funeral flowers. Still others report the aroma of African spices that have never been cultivated in Alabama. The transformation of the plantation's landscape continued throughout the day. The ancient oak tree that served as the cemetery for enslaved people began to grow at an accelerated rate, adding what appeared to be decades of growth in a matter of hours. Its branches spread wider, its trunk grew thicker, and its roots extended deep into the earth, as if it were claiming dominion over the entire plantation. Most significantly, the tree began to bear fruit, large, dark pods that hung from its branches like funeral ornaments. When these pods fell to the ground and split open, they revealed not seeds, but small objects that had belonged to the people buried beneath the tree. Jewelry, tools, personal items that had been buried with the dead and were now being returned to the surface. Samuel Morrison's documentation of these returned artifacts provided another layer of supernatural evidence. Each item corresponds to records in the plantation ledgers, a brass button from Jupiter's coat, buried with him in 1839, a wooden doll that belonged to little Moses, interred in 1841, a silver thimble that was Mercy Williams' only possession when she died in 1834. The tree is giving back what was taken, returning to the surface the memories that were buried with the dead. As evening approached, Lisa gathered all the plantation's residents for what she announced would be her final proclamation. Her words, recorded by multiple witnesses, carried the weight of supernatural authority. The dead have spoken their truth. The living have heard their testimony. The evidence has been preserved for those who will come after. But my work here is not finished. It is transformed. Lisa's announcement revealed the true purpose of her supernatural return. I was not sent back to seek revenge, but to ensure that the truth would be preserved and that justice would be served through proper channels. The ledger I carry contains evidence that will be discovered by federal investigators during the war that is coming. The artifacts returned by the tree will be found by archaeologists who will study this place in future generations. The spirits who testified will continue to watch over this land, ensuring that their stories are never forgotten. The supernatural phenomena that had transformed Wycliffe Plantation were not random acts of otherworldly vengeance, but carefully orchestrated events designed to preserve evidence and ensure that justice would eventually be served through human institutions. Lisa's role as a bridge between the living and the dead had allowed her to gather testimony and evidence that would otherwise have been lost forever. As the sun set on July 27, 1843, Lisa made her final preparation for what was to come. The supernatural forces that had brought her back from the dead were preparing to reclaim her, but not before she had completed her mission of ensuring that the truth about Wycliffe Plantation would survive for future generations to discover and understand. The price of blood had been calculated and payment was about to be collected, not through supernatural vengeance, but through the slow, inexorable process of historical justice that would unfold over the decades to come. The final sunset of Lisa Carter's supernatural sojourn painted the Alabama sky in shades of gold and crimson, as if the heavens themselves were acknowledging the completion of her otherworldly mission. July 28, 1843, would mark not just the end of Lisa's impossible return from death, but the beginning of a legacy that would echo through American history for generations to come. At precisely 6 p.m., according to the grandfather clock that had marked supernatural time throughout Lisa's return, she walked to the ancient oak tree that had served as both cemetery and witness to the plantation's darkest secrets. The tree, transformed by supernatural forces over the previous days, now stood as a living monument to the enslaved people who had died at Wycliffe Plantation. Its massive trunk bore the scars of their suffering, while its spreading branches offered shelter to their memories. Dr. Cornelius Blackwood, who had documented every aspect of Lisa's resurrection and supernatural activities, positioned himself to observe her final moments among the living. His medical journal entry for that evening provides the most detailed account of what transpired. The woman Lisa approached the oak tree with the same deliberate purpose that had characterized all her actions since returning from death. But now there was also a sense of completion, as if she had fulfilled a sacred obligation and was ready to accept whatever came next. The enslaved community gathered at a respectful distance, understanding that they were witnessing something that transcended normal human experience. Old Moses, who had served as their spiritual leader throughout the supernatural events, later told WPA interviewers, "We knew she was going back to the other side, but we also knew she had done what she came to do. The truth was out. The evidence was preserved, and the ancestors could rest, knowing their stories would be told. As Lisa stood beneath the oak tree, the supernatural phenomena that had transformed the plantation began to intensify one final time. The leather-bound ledger she carried, containing the complete record of crimes committed at Wycliffe, began to glow with an inner light that was visible even in the fading daylight. According to witnesses, the book seemed to be absorbing the last rays of sunlight, storing them for some future purpose. Thomas Hartwell, whose journal had documented the plantation's descent into supernatural chaos, observed Lisa's final preparations with a mixture of fear and fascination. She placed the ledger at the base of the oak tree, and immediately the ground began to change. The earth opened like a mouth, swallowing the book, but leaving no trace of disturbance on the surface. Yet somehow, I knew the ledger was not destroyed. It was being preserved, hidden until the time was right for its discovery. Lisa's final words to the living residents of Wycliffe Plantation were delivered with the authority of someone who had seen beyond the veil of death and understood the true nature of justice. The evidence is preserved. The truth is protected. The dead are at peace, but their stories will live on, waiting to be discovered by those who have the courage to seek justice and the wisdom to learn from the past. As she spoke, the artifacts that had emerged from the oak tree's supernatural pods began to glow with the same inner light as the ledger. According to Dr. Blackwood's observations, these personal items, jewelry, tools, and mementos of the dead, were being transformed into something more than mere objects. They were becoming vessels of memory, carriers of truth that would survive long after the supernatural events had ended. The moment of Lisa's final departure was witnessed by 17 people and documented in multiple sources. At exactly 7:17 p.m., as the last light of day faded from the Alabama sky, Lisa Carter simply faded away. Unlike her dramatic resurrection, her return to death was gentle, gradual, like a photograph slowly losing its definition. She smiled as she disappeared, and witnesses reported hearing her voice one last time, speaking words in an African dialect that somehow everyone understood. Until justice is done, we are never truly gone. The immediate aftermath of Lisa's departure was marked by a profound silence that seemed to encompass the entire plantation. The supernatural phenomena that had plagued Wycliffe for 5 days suddenly ceased. The temperature returned to normal, the strange lights disappeared, and the oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the property lifted like morning fog. But the changes Lisa had wrought were permanent. The hidden chamber beneath the main house remained flooded with supernatural water that never drained or evaporated. The rose garden continued to bloom with impossible flowers that changed color with the seasons. And the oak tree stood as a living monument, its branches providing shelter for birds that sang in harmonies that reminded listeners of African lullabies. Most importantly, the evidence Lisa had gathered and preserved would fulfill its intended purpose. During the Civil War, when Union forces occupied the plantation in 1863, soldiers discovered the leather-bound ledger exactly where Lisa had placed it 20 years earlier. The book's contents provided crucial evidence for war crimes tribunals and helped establish legal precedents for prosecuting crimes against enslaved people. The artifacts preserved by the oak tree were discovered by archaeologists from the University of Alabama in 1923 during the first systematic excavation of a former plantation site. Each item was found to contain trace elements that allowed scientists to identify the individuals to whom they had belonged, providing names and stories for people who had been buried in unmarked graves. Dr. Blackwood's medical journals, preserved in the Alabama Medical Historical Society, became crucial documents for historians studying the intersection of medicine, slavery, and supernatural phenomena in the antebellum South. His detailed observations of Lisa's resurrection and supernatural abilities provided scientific documentation of events that might otherwise have been dismissed as folklore. The oral histories collected by the Works Progress Administration in the 1930s included dozens of interviews with former enslaved people who had heard stories about Lisa Carter from their parents and grandparents. These accounts, preserved in the Library of Congress, ensured that Lisa's story would survive in the collective memory of the African American community. Perhaps most significantly, the Wycliffe Plantation site was designated as a National Historic Landmark in 1967, specifically because of the evidence preserved through Lisa's supernatural intervention. The site now serves as a museum and research center dedicated to documenting the experiences of enslaved people in Alabama, with Lisa Carter's story serving as the centerpiece of its educational mission. Modern visitors to the Wycliffe Plantation Museum report unusual experiences that echo the supernatural events of 1843. Photographs taken near the oak tree sometimes reveal figures that weren't visible to the naked eye. Audio recordings capture voices speaking in African languages. And sensitive individuals report feeling a presence that seems to be watching, waiting, ensuring that the stories of the dead are never forgotten. The legacy of Lisa Carter extends far beyond the boundaries of Wycliffe Plantation. Her story has inspired civil rights activists, historians, and spiritual leaders who see in her supernatural return a powerful metaphor for the persistence of truth and the inevitability of justice. The phrase, "Until justice is done, we are never truly gone," has become a rallying cry for those seeking to uncover hidden histories and give voice to the voiceless. In 1968, during the height of the civil rights movement, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. visited the Wycliffe Plantation Museum and spoke about Lisa Carter's story in a sermon delivered at the nearby Bethel Baptist Church. His words, preserved in the church's archives, connected Lisa's supernatural quest for justice to the ongoing struggle for civil rights. Sister Lisa showed us that truth cannot be buried forever, that justice delayed is not justice denied, and that the spirits of our ancestors continue to guide us toward freedom. Today, the scientific community has also taken interest in Lisa's story, not as a supernatural phenomenon, but as a case study in how traumatic historical events can be preserved through oral tradition and physical evidence. Archaeologists, historians, and anthropologists have used the Wycliffe site as a model for investigating other plantation sites, leading to discoveries that have revolutionized our understanding of slavery in America. The psychological impact of Lisa's story on subsequent generations cannot be overstated. For many African Americans, her tale represents the power of ancestral connection and the importance of remembering those who suffered and died without recognition. The story has been retold in countless forms: books, films, songs, and oral traditions, each version adding new layers of meaning while preserving the core message of justice and remembrance. Modern paranormal investigators continue to study the Wycliffe Plantation site, documenting phenomena that seem to echo the supernatural events of 1843. Electronic voice phenomena recordings capture whispers in African languages. Electromagnetic field detectors register unusual readings near the oak tree, and thermal imaging cameras reveal cold spots that correspond to the locations where Lisa's supernatural testimonies took place. The academic study of Lisa Carter's story has contributed to the emerging field of supernatural history. The examination of how supernatural beliefs and experiences have shaped historical events and cultural memory. Scholars from universities across the United States have published papers analyzing the intersection of African spiritual traditions, American slavery, and supernatural phenomena as documented in the Wycliffe case. Perhaps most importantly, Lisa's story has inspired a new generation of historians and activists to seek out and preserve the stories of other enslaved people whose experiences have been hidden or forgotten. The Lisa Carter Project, established by the National Museum of African American History and Culture in 2016, has documented over 3,000 previously unknown stories of enslaved individuals, using Lisa's supernatural preservation of evidence as a model for historical investigation. As the sun sets on our journey through Lisa Carter's impossible story, we are left with questions that transcend the boundaries between history and mystery, between the natural and supernatural, between the past and present. Did Lisa Carter truly return from the dead to ensure that justice would be served? Or does her story represent something even more powerful, the indomitable human spirit's refusal to let truth be buried forever? The evidence preserved through her supernatural intervention continues to yield new discoveries. In 2019, ground-penetrating radar revealed additional unmarked graves at the Wycliffe site, exactly where Lisa's ghostly witnesses had indicated they would be found. DNA analysis of remains discovered in these graves has allowed genealogists to reconnect modern families with ancestors they never knew existed. The leather-bound ledger that Lisa placed beneath the oak tree was subjected to advanced forensic analysis in 2020, revealing that the ink used to record the plantation's crimes contained trace elements consistent with 19th century writing materials, but arranged in molecular patterns that should not have been possible with period technology. The book remains one of the most studied artifacts in American history, a physical link between the supernatural events of 1843 and the ongoing quest for historical truth. Today, visitors to the Wycliffe Plantation Museum can stand beneath the same oak tree where Lisa Carter made her final appearance among the living. The tree, now over 180 years old, continues to grow and flourish, its branches reaching toward the sky like arms raised in eternal testimony. Plaques around its base bear the names of all 47 people whose deaths were documented through Lisa's supernatural intervention, ensuring that they are remembered not as statistics, but as individuals whose lives had meaning and whose deaths demanded justice. The museum's guestbook contains thousands of entries from visitors who report feeling a profound sense of connection to the past while standing beneath the oak tree. Many describe experiencing what they call ancestral presence, a feeling that they are not alone, that the spirits of those who suffered and died at Wycliffe continue to watch over the site, ensuring that their stories are told and their sacrifices remembered. Lisa Carter's story reminds us that history is not just a collection of dates and facts, but a living tapestry woven from the experiences of real people who loved, suffered, hoped, and died. Her supernatural return from death, whether literal truth or powerful metaphor, demonstrates that some truths are too important to remain buried, some injustices too profound to be forgotten, and some spirits too strong to be silenced by death itself. In the end, Lisa Carter achieved something that transcends the boundaries between life and death. She ensured that the voiceless would be heard, the forgotten would be remembered, and the truth would survive to inspire future generations in their own quests for justice and understanding. Her legacy lives on in every historian who seeks to uncover hidden truths, every activist who fights for justice, and every person who refuses to let the stories of the oppressed be forgotten. Until justice is done, Lisa Carter and all those she represented are never truly gone.